Good evening. I'd like to share a book with you that's been very meaningful to me for a good number of years. Um, a few things before I start. I'm not a professional speaker, I'm not a professional reader. It's been a long time since I've read a book out loud, but I'm going to anyway because I love the book and I'd like to share the love of this book with you. I'd like to dedicate the reading of this book to the late Patty Cabine, who was a librarian who read this book to me at a young age. So, without further ado, this book is called Rascal by Sterling North. Chapter 1. It was in May 1918 that a new friend and companion came into my life. A character, a personality, and a ring-tailed wonder. He weighed less than 1 pound when I discovered him. A furry ball of utter dependence and awakening curiosity, unweaned and defenseless. Wowzer and I were immediately protective. We would have fought any dog or boy in town who sought to harm him. Wowzer was an exceptionally intelligent and responsible watchdog, guarding our house and lawns and gardens and all my pets. But because of his vast size, 170 pounds of muscled grace and elegance, he seldom had to resort to violence. He could shake any dog on the block as a terrier shakes a rat. Wowzer never started a fight, but after being challenged, badgered, and insulted, he eventually would turn his worried face and great sad eyes upon his tormentor, and more in sorrow than in anger, grab the intruder by the scruff of the neck and toss him into the gutter. Wowzer was an affectionate, perpetually hungry St. Bernard. Like most dogs of his breed, he drooled a little. In the house he had to lie with his muzzle on a bath towel, his eyes downcast as though in slight disgrace. Pat Delaney, a saloon keeper, who lived a couple of blocks up the street, said that St. Bernards drool for all of the best of possible reasons. He explained that in the Alps, these noble dogs set forth every winter with little kegs of brandy strapped beneath their chins to rescue wayfarers lost in the snowdrifts. Generations of carrying the brandy, of which they have never tasted so much as a blessed drop, have made them so thirsty that they continuously drool. The trait that now became hereditary, Pat said, and whole litters of bright and thirsty little St. Bernards are born drooling for brandy. On this pleasant afternoon in May, Wowzer and I started up First Street toward Crescent Drive, where a semicircle of late Victorian houses enjoyed a hilltop view. Northward lay miles of meadows, groves of trees, a winding stream, and the best duck and muskrat marsh in Rock County. As we turned down a country lane, past Bardine's orchard and vineyard, the signature of spring was everywhere. Violets and anemones in the grass, the apple trees in promising bud along the bow. Ahead lay some of the most productive walnut and hickory trees I had ever looted, a good swimming hole in the creek, and in one bit of forest, a real curiosity, a phosphorescent stump which gleamed at night with foxfire, as luminescent as all the lightning bugs in the world, ghostly and terrifying to boys who saw it for the first time. It scared me witless as I came home one evening from fishing, so I made it a point to bring my friends that way on other evenings, not wishing to be selfish about my pleasures. Oscar Sunderland saw me as I passed his bleak farmhouse far down that lane. He was a friend of mine who knew enough not to talk when we went fishing, and we were trapping partners on the marsh. His mother was a gentle Norwegian woman who spoke English with no trace of an accent, and also her native language. His father, Herman Sunderland, was another kettle of Hassenpfeffer, German on his mother's side, Swedish on his father's, with a temper and dialect all his own. Oscar's mother baked delicious Norwegian pastries, particularly around Christmas time. Sometimes, in placing before me a plate of her delicacies, she would say something tender to me in Norwegian. I always turned away to hide the shameful moisture in my eyes. As Mrs. Sunderland knew, my mother had died when I was 7, and I think that was why she was especially kind to me. Oscar's tough old father presented no such problem. I doubted that he had ever said anything kind to anyone in his life. Oscar was very much afraid of him, and risked a whipping if he were not at home in time to help with the milking. No one was concerned about the hours I kept. I was a very competent 11-year-old. If I came home long after dark, my father would merely look up from his book to greet me vaguely and courteously. He allowed me to live my own life, keep pet skunks and woodchucks in the backyard and the barn, pamper my tame crow, my many cats, and my faithful St. Bernard. He even let me build my 18-foot canoe in the living room. I had not entirely completed the framework, so it would take another year at least. When we had visitors, they sat in the easy chairs surrounding the canoe, or skirted the prow to reach the great shelves of books we were continuously lending. We lived alone and liked it, cooked and cleaned in our own fashion, and paid little attention to indignant housewives who told my father that this was no way to bring up a child. My father agreed, amiably, that this might well be true, and then returned to his endless research for a novel concerning the Fox and Winnebago Indians, which for some reason was never published. I'm heading for Wentworth's Woods, I told Oscar, and I may not start home before moonrise. Wait a minute, Oscar said. We need something to eat. He returned swiftly with a paper sack filled with coffee, cake, and cookies that I knew he had swiped them. You'll get a lickin' when you get home. Ishkabibble, I should worry, Oscar said, a happy grin spreading across his wide face. We crossed the creek on the stepping stones below the dam. Pickerel were making their seasonal run up the stream, and we nearly caught one with our hands as he snaked his way between the stones. Killdeer started up from the marshy shallows, crying, "Killdeer! Killdeer!" as though a storm were brewing. Wowzer had many virtues, but he was not a hunting dog, so we were much surprised when in Wentworth's Woods he came to a virtual point. Oscar and I waited silently while the St. Bernard, on his great paws, padded softly to the hollow base of a rotten stump. He sniffed the hole critically, then turned and whined, telling us plainly that something lived in that den. "Dig him out, Wowzer," I shouted. "He won't dig," Oscar predicted. "He's too lazy." "You just watch," I said loyally, but I wasn't betting any glass marbles. In another minute, Wowzer was making the dirt fly, and Oscar and I were helping in a frenzy of excitement. We scooped the soft earth with our hands and used our pocket knives when we came to old decaying roots. "I'll bet it's a fox," I panted hopefully. "Probably an old woodchuck," Oscar said. But we couldn't have been more surprised when a furious mother raccoon exploded from her lair, screaming her rage and dismay. Wowzer nearly fell over backwards to avoid the flying claws and slashing little teeth. A moment later, the big raccoon had racked her way up a slender oak tree. 30 feet above us, she continued to scream and scold. In plain sight now, within the den, we found 4 baby raccoons, a month old perhaps. The entire litter of kits might easily have fitted within my cap. Each tail had 5 black rings. Each small face had a sharp black mask. 8 bright eyes peered up at us, filled with wonder and worry. And from 4 inquiring little mouths came whimpering questions. Good old Wowzer, I said. That's a pretty good dog you've got there, Oscar admitted. But you better hold him back. He wouldn't hurt them. He takes care of all my pets. In fact, the big dog settled down with a sigh of satisfaction as near to the nest as possible, ready to adopt one or all of these interesting little creatures. But there was one service he could not render. He could not feed them. We can't take them home without their mother, I told Oscar. They're too young. Well, how do we catch the mother? Oscar asked. We draw straws. And then what? The one who gets the short straw shinnies up the tree and catches her. Oh, no, Oscar said. Oh, no, you don't. I ain't that crazy. Come on, Oscar. No, sirree. But at just this moment, the four little raccoons set up such a plaintive quavering that we all felt miserable. We had to catch that mother raccoon. Wowzer was as sad as I was. He pointed his big muzzle toward the evening sky and howled mournfully. Well, Oscar said, kicking his shoe into the fresh earth, I'd better be getting home to help with the milking. Quitter, I taunted. Who's a quitter? You're a quitter. Well, okay, I'll draw straws, but I think you're loony. I held the straws, and Oscar drew the long one. Naturally, I had to live up to my bargain. I looked far above me in the fading glow of the sunset. There she still was, 20 pounds of ring-tailed dynamite. I patted Wowzer as though for the last time, and began my tough scramble up the slender trunk. As I shinnied up the tree, in no great hurry to tangle with the raccoon, I had one piece of good fortune. The full moon began to rise above an eastern hill, giving me a little more light for my dangerous maneuver. Far out on the first limb, the outraged animal took a firm stance, facing me, her eyes glowing balefully in the moonlight. I'm going to cut off the branch with my jackknife, I told Oscar. And then what? You're supposed to catch her when she falls in the hazel brush. Oscar suggested that I had bats in my belfry, but he took off his corduroy jacket and prepared to throw it over the raccoon in a do-or-die effort for which he had little enthusiasm. Whittling through 2 1/2 inches of white oak with a fairly dull jackknife is a laborious process, as I soon discovered. I was in a cramped position, holding on with my left hand and hacking away at the wood with my right, and I feared the raccoon might try to rush me when the limb began to break. The moon rose slowly through the trees as blisters rose slowly on my right hand, but I couldn't weaken now. From far below came the whimpering of the raccoon kits and an occasional mournful howl from Wowzer. Tree toads and frogs in the swamp began their chorus, and a little screech owl, sounding almost like another raccoon, added an eerie tremolo. How you comin'? Oscar asked. Comin' fine. Get ready to catch her. Count on me, Oscar said in his voice less convincing than his brave words. The tasseled limb of the white oak sighed its last, broke with a snap, and drifted down to the hazel brush below. Oscar tried. I will give him credit for that. He tangled for 5 seconds with that raccoon, and then retreated with a damaged jacket. 3 of the little raccoons, hearing their mother's call, trundled with amazing swiftness into the hazel brush to follow her, and were gone. Oscar, however, was quick enough to cup one kit in his cap. Our only reward for our labor, but reward enough, as time would prove. As nearly as we could tell, the handsome, sharply marked little animal was covered only with soft gray underfur, having a few of the darker guard hairs, which later gleam on the adult raccoon. He was the only baby raccoon I have ever held in my hands, and as he nestled upward like a quail chick, and nuzzled like a puppy seeking its mother's milk, I was both overwhelmed with the ecstasy of ownership and frightened by the enormous responsibility we had assumed. Wowzer romped beside us through the moonlight, often coming to sniff and lick the new pet as we had found. This bit of masked mischief which had stolen his heart as well as my own. "He's yours," Oscar said sadly. "My old man would never let me keep him. He shot a coon in the chicken coop just a few weeks ago." "Well, you can come see him," I suggested. "Sure, I can come see him." We walked in silence for a time, thinking of the injustices of the world that made so few allowances for the nature of raccoons and boys of our age. Then we began talking about all the raccoons we'd ever seen, and how we would feed this kit and teach him all the things he would have to learn. "I seen a raccoon mother once with 5 kits," Oscar said. "Well, what were they doing?" "She was leading them along the edge of the stream. They did everything she did." "Well, like what?" "Feeling around with their front paws, hunting for crawdads, I guess." On the horizon, there were flashes of distant lightning and a low rumbling of thunder, sounding like artillery many miles away. It reminded us that the war was still raging in France, and that maybe my brother Herschel was being moved up to the front. I hated to think about that terrible war, which had been killing and wounding millions of men ever since the year my mother died. Here we were safe, remote from the war, and worrying about such small and unimportant things as whether Oscar would get a whipping when he got home, and how to feed and raise a little raccoon. As we came up the lane towards Sunderland's farmhouse, Oscar began saying, "Ishkabibble, I should worry." But he acted worried to me. When we reached his front yard, he dared me and double dared me to go up and knock on the door. Meanwhile, he hid behind a flowering spirea bush and waited to see what might happen. Oscar was wise to let me do the knocking. Herman Sunderland came storming out, swearing in German and Swedish. He was certainly angry with Oscar, and he didn't seem to like me very much either. "Where is that no good son of mine?" "It wasn't Oscar's fault," I said. "I asked him to come for a walk with me, and—" "Where is he now?" "Well," I said. Well, what do you mean, well?" "We dug out a den of raccoons," I said, "and here is one we brought home." "Coons!" shouted Sunderland. "Varmits." I was afraid that Mr. Sunderland might flush Oscar from behind the spirea bush, but at just this moment, Oscar's gracious mother came out on the front porch, the moonlight shining on her silver hair. I'll show you a quick picture if you can see that. "Go to bed, Herman," she said quietly. "I'll take care of this. Come out, Oscar, from behind that bush." To my surprise, Oscar's father meekly obeyed, taking a lamp up the long, dark parlor stairway, his shadow much taller than himself. And Oscar's mother took us to the kitchen, where she fed us on warm supper and began to heat a little milk to the temperature that would be right for a human baby. "It is hungry, the little one," she said, petting the small raccoon. "Go fetch a clean wheat straw, Oscar." She filled her own mouth with warm milk, put the wheat straw between her lips, slanted the straw down to the mouth of the little raccoon. I watched, fascinated, as my new pet took the straw eagerly and began to nurse. "Look how the little one eats," Oscar's mother said. "This is the way you will have to feed him, Sterling."